He refused to give up his seat. What happened next? Changed an entire airline. Have you ever wondered what dignity really looks like at 30,000 feet? What happens when a calm, successful black man sitting quietly in a first-class seat he rightfully paid for is told to move, simply because another man expected it to be his? What would you do if the whole cabin went silent? If the crew looked the other way? If no one stood up for you? Would you get angry? Would you give in? Or would you sit still and let the world reckon with your silence? This is the story of Langston Rhoades, a quiet powerhouse in a tailored coat, whose refusal to be displaced led not to a viral moment, but to a movement that shook the entire aviation industry from the inside out. It's not just a story about a seat. It's about respect, reckoning, and what it truly means to belong. So grab your headphones, breathe deep, and prepare for the most powerful flight you've never taken. If this touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. Let's board the story. It was the kind of morning New York was famous for: gray, hushed, and slightly damp, with a low ceiling of clouds hanging like a lid over JFK. Inside Terminal 8, however, the world was glowing in polished glass and brushed steel. At Gate C-27, where Aerolux Airlines prepared its daily prestige route to Oslo, the usual hum of business-class murmurs floated above the marble floor talk of mergers, markets, and ski chalets in St. Moritz. But in all the buzz and posturing, one man stood quietly apart. Langston Rhoades didn't draw attention to himself. He never had to. He sat alone near the window, his charcoal overcoat folded neatly across his lap, a soft leather briefcase resting at his feet. In his hands was a simple paperback, The Plague by Camus, creased, underlined, worn like it had been read not once, but many times over. To any passerby, he looked like another quiet professional, maybe a mid-level executive, maybe an academic. His clothes were sharp but understated, no labels screaming for validation. His posture was relaxed, but not slack. There was control in every detail. He was a man who was comfortable in his own silence. Langston had always believed in observing more than speaking. That morning, as he watched the ground crew attach the jet bridge to the nose of the massive Aerolux A380, he was already thinking 5 steps ahead. This flight to Oslo wasn't just another routine international trip. It was the closing chapter of a 3-year negotiation to acquire Nordic Innovations, one of Scandinavia's most respected renewable energy research labs. Once complete, the deal would not only make Viavax Industries the global leader in solar grid integration, it would cement Langston's quiet rise into one of the most influential black CEOs in the global tech sphere. And no one on this flight had a clue who he was. He preferred it that way. He didn't fly private, even though he could. He didn't travel with an entourage or require any advance notice. He believed in showing up as a customer, not a symbol, not a spectacle. Just a person moving through the world, listening to how it breathes. As boarding began, Langston stood, stretched briefly, and walked toward the gate agent with the calm certainty of a man who'd earned everything he had. He scanned his mobile boarding pass. The agent glanced at the name and blinked in recognition not of who he was, but of what he'd paid for. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Rhoades, Suite 1A, right this way." He offered a polite nod and stepped down the jet bridge into the soft hush of the aircraft cabin. Aerolux prided itself on its top-tier Altitude 1 suites, and rightly so. The 12 forward-facing pods were the epitome of curated privilege walls wrapped in matte walnut, private sliding doors, even a full-length closet for tailored suits, a sanctuary in the sky built for those who expected more than just luxury. They expected reverence. Langston took his seat in 1A, the front left suite by the window, and settled in. The leather creaked softly under him. A silk pillow waited at his back. From his vantage point, the plane was a quiet cathedral of wealth. He pulled out his tablet, tapped open his encrypted files, and scanned over the final acquisition terms. The numbers were clean. His Norwegian counterparts had played hardball. But, in the end, substance spoke louder than swagger. They respected him not for the size of his portfolio, but for the sharpness of his mind. A flight attendant approached with the practiced smile of someone who'd mastered the art of being visible without ever being personal. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Aerolux Altitude 1. May I offer you our signature pre-flight mimosa or a chilled Pellegrino?" Langston offered a kind smile. "Pellegrino. Thank you. No citrus." She returned a moment later with the glass and a warm towel. He accepted both without comment. The minutes passed. First-class passengers trickled in, their voices soft and their luggage loud. Designer coats rustled. The sound of zippers and suit bags filled the suite. Langston heard 3 different languages in 5 minutes. He folded his towel neatly and placed it on the side console. Across the aisle, a man in a navy pinstripe suit was already on his phone, barking about supply chains. Langston sipped his water. His eyes drifted to the window, where the wingtip gleamed against the gray sky. For a moment, there was stillness, a fragile peace before altitude, and then it came, a voice from behind, sharp, entitled, clipped like a country club invitation. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." Langston didn't respond right away. He closed his tablet with deliberate calm, looked up, and turned toward the man standing before him. Tall, mid-50s, silver blonde hair swept back, blazer with gold cufflinks, a travel bag that screamed monogrammed legacy. The kind of man who ordered staff around at weddings and didn't remember their names. Langston met his eyes and replied with quiet certainty, "I believe this is 1A." He raised his boarding pass. The man, Bradford Elwood IV, though that name had not yet been spoken, did not even look at the screen. "That's not possible. My assistant books this exact seat for me on every Oslo run. I've flown this leg for years. That's my seat." Langston didn't move. "My seat was selected during online check-in 2 days ago, confirmed and unaltered." He said it with no sharpness, no ego, just fact. Bradford's mouth curled, as if he'd smelled something sour. Langston could already feel it beginning. The shift in atmosphere. The coded calculations happening in real time. His suit didn't matter. His composure didn't matter. To this man, all that mattered was who looked like they belonged. And he was being told wordlessly, insistently, that he did not. Langston glanced up again, and this time he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He knew exactly where this was going, and this time he wasn't going to let the sky swallow it in silence. Bradford Elwood IV stood over the seat like a man who'd discovered a stranger lounging in his private study. His chest puffed beneath a well-tailored navy sports coat. His expression wasn't angry. Not yet. Just confident. Confident that the world would bend the moment he raised his voice. Langston Rhoades remained still. Stillness was his armor, his instrument. Bradford turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder. "Excuse me," he called, louder now. "We've got a seating error up here." A few heads turned from neighboring suites. The hum of soft conversations dulled as a ripple of awareness passed through the cabin. There was nothing unusual yet, just a discrepancy. These things happened. Langston kept his gaze forward, not to ignore, but to control the temperature. He could feel at the first stirrings of something deeper, not just a logistical misunderstanding, but a reckoning in the making. The flight attendant returned. This time, it wasn't the soft-spoken one from earlier. A new woman appeared, brisk and precise. Her blonde bob cut into clean, symmetrical angles. She wore the tailored Aerolux blazer like a badge of seniority, her stride sharp with quiet authority. "Good morning," she said, her voice dipped in professional sweetness. "What seems to be the issue?" Bradford gestured broadly, his gold cufflink flashing under the cabin light. "This gentleman is in my seat, 1A. I've flown this route every quarter for over a decade. My assistant always books it. This has to be some mix-up." Langston turned to face her. His voice remained calm. "There's no mix-up. I selected and confirmed this seat during online check-in 2 days ago." She glanced between the two men. Her eyes lingered just half a second longer on Bradford, not in a malicious way, just familiar. She recognized him, likely from previous flights. High-status customers had that kind of imprint in her memory. "I'm sure we can resolve this quickly," she said. "May I see your boarding pass?" Sir Langston handed over his phone. She glanced down at the screen. The name was clear. Langston Rhoades, Suite 1A, confirmed, time-stamped, still. Her brow furrowed ever so slightly. She turned to Bradford. "I'll just check with the gate to verify. It's possible the system reassigned seats after check-in." Bradford smirked. "Told you. It's mine. Always is." Langston remained silent, but his heart ticked faster. He'd seen this play before. He'd lived it in conference rooms and hotel lobbies, luxury car dealerships and bank offices. The script was different every time, but the outcome familiar. There was always a reason he didn't belong, a mistake, a reassignment, an unfortunate technical issue, and it always ended the same, with someone deciding his claim was somehow less valid than someone else's comfort. The attendant returned a moment later. She offered Bradford a tight smile. "Mr. Elwood. I'm afraid the seat is currently assigned to Mr. Rhoades. I've confirmed it with the gate manifest." Bradford blinked. Just once. His lips parted slightly in disbelief. "There has to be an override," he said. "Sir, an override. Check my loyalty status. I'm Titanium Apex. My firm books through Aerolux Executive Direct. My assistant made the reservation months ago. This can't be right." She hesitated, then smiled tightly. "I'll speak with the purser." She turned and disappeared behind the partition that separated the suites from the forward galley. Langston looked out the window again. The clouds were thick, unmoving. The jet bridge had detached. The plane was sealed. He felt his fingers tighten around the leather edge of his armrest. Not from fear, not from anger, from recognition. He remembered the first time he saw this pattern unfold. He was 23, in his first consulting job, sent to Singapore to present a strategy deck on a clean energy pivot. He'd boarded early, claimed his business class seat. An older man approached, frowned, and summoned a flight attendant. The seat was assigned to Langston. The boarding pass proved it, but the attendant asked if he'd mind switching just to make everyone comfortable. He had agreed. That time, but not this one. This seat wasn't just a seat, not anymore. The purser arrived. Her nameplate read Carla Denning. She looked every bit the veteran, impeccably composed, eyes like polished glass. She had the kind of practiced voice that could read an emergency protocol while offering you a Chardonnay. "Mr. Rhoades," she said, "I understand there's been some confusion." Langston nodded slowly. "No confusion on my part." She smiled thinly. "Of course, but we do occasionally encounter legacy bookings with our executive direct clients that don't always reflect accurately on the public manifest. Mr. Elwood is one of our top-tier travelers." Langston tilted his head slightly. "And I'm a paying customer with a confirmed seat. Do you intend to remove me?" Carla's smile didn't break, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "Not remove. We're asking for your cooperation. We'd be happy to upgrade you to another premium suite. 4B is available. It's quite lovely." Langston's lips pressed together. "I selected this seat for a reason. My seat is 1A, not 4B. Bradford sighed audibly. "This is absurd. I have a connection in Oslo. This man can sit anywhere." Langston looked at him now, directly. "If the seat doesn't matter, Mr. Elwood, then you're welcome to take 4B. Bradford flushed. "That's not the point. It is for me," Langston said, voice still quiet, still unwavering. "It's not about the seat, it's about the principle." Carla's smile dropped. "Mr. Rhoades, I need to ask you again, firmly, please relocate. We must finalize cabin checks." Langston held her gaze. "Show me a policy that says a customer with a confirmed boarding pass must surrender their seat to someone with more miles." She blinked. "That's not what I said, but it's what you're asking." A pause, a sharp breath, a new voice. "Ma'am," came a softer tone, a different tone. Alyssa Tran stepped forward. She had been quietly watching from the galley. Her youthful face was tinged with anxiety, but her voice didn't waver. "I saw Mr. Rhodes's boarding pass when he boarded. It's valid. He was checked in and cleared. Suite 1A. No errors in the system." Carla turned to her, voice low and clipped. "Thank you. Alyssa, you're dismissed from this matter." Langston turned now, looked at the young woman. She looked back, an unspoken apology in her eyes. He turned back to Carla. "If you're going to escalate this, go ahead and call the captain. I will not yield my seat." There was a beat of silence, the kind that makes cabin air seem heavier. Then Carla tapped her intercom. "Flight deck, Purser Denon. I need Captain Stokes in Suite 1. Passenger refusal." And just like that, the chessboard shifted. Langston knew the next move. He had seen it before. But what they didn't know was that they were about to play the wrong end of the board. The cabin fell into an uneasy quiet as Captain Harvey Stokes arrived, his tall frame cutting through the narrow aisle with practiced authority. He was the kind of man who wore his 30 years of flight experience like a medal. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his crisp uniform spotless. When he spoke, his voice commanded attention without raising in volume. But today, the calm in his tone belied the storm about to break. Captain Stokes approached the scene without looking at Langston first. His eyes were fixed on Carla Denning, the lead purser, whose lips were pressed in a tight line. She briefed him quickly, outlining the passenger noncompliance issue with a voice that carried the weight of protocol rather than empathy. "I understand." "Carla," Captain Stokes said, nodding, Then, his gaze shifted to Langston. "Sir, I'm Captain Stokes. What seems to be the trouble here?" Langston looked up slowly, eyes steady, unflinching. The weight of the moment settled over him like a dense fog. Yet he remained composed. "Captain, I'm in the seat I purchased and confirmed. I was asked to move by your crew to accommodate another passenger's preference despite my confirmed boarding pass." Captain Stokes's expression hardened. "I'm aware of the situation, but for the sake of schedule and safety, we must resolve this swiftly. We have two options: you move to the available suite or you disembark." Langston's heart beat steadily. He understood the power in those words, the invisible hand that could push him out. But his mind was clearer than ever. "Captain, I cannot simply surrender my seat because another passenger demands it. This is a matter of principle and contract." The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. He was a man who had spent decades making decisions based on procedure and chain of command. Today, he found himself caught between those rules and the uncomfortable reality of bias in his own crew. Carla interjected, "Captain, Mr. Elwood is a valued frequent flyer and long-standing client. Our loyalty program tiers are critical to our operations." Langston caught the slight inflection, the coded meaning beneath the polite words. It was not about loyalty to passengers, but loyalty to the old ways that prioritized money and status over fairness. "I appreciate that," Langston replied quietly, "but loyalty does not grant permission to override paid agreements or respect." Captain Stokes rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then glanced around at the other passengers who had begun to sense the tension. A woman in 2C folded her newspaper and stared. A young man in 3D shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The atmosphere was taut, a silent drama playing out at 30,000 feet, far removed from the clouds beyond the windows. Carla stepped closer, lowering her voice but keeping firm. "Sir, this is a request from the crew. Please cooperate so we can depart on time." Langston inhaled slowly, feeling the gravity of being labeled the problem in an equation he never signed up for. His mind flickered to earlier times boardrooms where he had been overlooked, dinners where his ideas were dismissed, the countless occasions where his presence alone was considered disruptive. He thought about his mother's voice, steady and wise, reminding him that dignity was not always loud but always resolute. "I will not be moved against my will," Langston said calmly. "I respect the crew's position, but I ask you to respect mine as a paying customer and human being." Captain Stokes exchanged a brief glance with Carla before sighing. "Very well. I must inform you that refusal to comply with crew instructions can result in removal from the flight." Langston nodded. "Steady. I understand the consequences." The words hung heavy. Alyssa Tran, the junior attendant, watched silently from the galley, her heart pounding. She had witnessed the interaction, seen the injustice unfold with every polite refusal Langston gave, every coded slight he endured. Her fingers clenched the edge of the service cart. She wanted to intervene more, to say more, but knew her place was limited. The captain turned back to his crew and pressed his intercom. "Prepare for possible deplaning procedure." Langston felt the eyes of the cabin on him, the silent judgment, the curiosity, and the discomfort. His own thoughts spiraled momentarily. Was this fight worth it? Was the principle worth the humiliation, the delay, the potential fallout? But deep inside, an unshakable calm answered, yes. He remembered the faces of young black boys who looked up to him, hoping to see someone like them rise without bending to unfairness. He remembered the countless silent battles waged every day by people whose voices were muffled under layers of systemic bias. This was more than a seat. This was a stand. Minutes passed. The captain returned, now flanked by two stern-faced security officers quietly taking positions near the front door. Langston stood, collected his belongings, and spoke softly. "I choose not to move. I choose to deplane." There was a startled silence. Bradford Elwood's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of triumph. Carla's lips tightened, an unspoken warning. But Langston did not look back. He walked down the aisle, each step purposeful, measured, a quiet declaration of dignity. At the jet bridge, as he stepped onto the terminal floor, his phone buzzed. He answered swiftly. "Nadine," he said, voice steady. "We have a problem on Flight 217. There was a brief pause on the other end. Details," came the calm but firm reply. "The crew has refused to honor my seat. I'm off the plane. Ground the flight." Nadine Mercer's voice didn't waver. "Understood. I'll make the calls." Langston ended the call and took a breath. He felt no bitterness, only the resolve to remake what had been broken. Back on the plane, Bradford sank deeper into 1A, demanding champagne, savoring the hollow victory of entitlement. The cabin crew went about their duties with forced smiles, unaware that the shift had already begun. A few seats behind, Alyssa Tran steadied herself, ready for the storm. Langston's departure was not the end. It was the beginning. Captain Harvey Stokes returned to the forward cabin with a renewed air of authority, his face set in a mask of calm determination. The polished brass buttons on his uniform caught the light from the overhead panels as he made his way toward the center of the confrontation. Passengers in the immediate vicinity shifted uneasily in their seats, the atmosphere thickening with anticipation. "Mr. Rhoades," the captain began, his voice measured and steady. "I understand you have refused to comply with the crew's request to relocate from your assigned suite." Langston met his gaze without hesitation, his own voice low but unwavering. "Captain Stokes, I am sitting exactly where I purchased and confirmed my ticket. I was asked to give up my seat for another passenger without cause. I have declined." The captain nodded once, acknowledging the words, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration. "Sir, the situation as presented to me is that your refusal is delaying departure and causing a disruption to the cabin environment. This is a safety and schedule concern." Langston allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible sigh. It was the familiar language of power wielded without justice. "Captain, with respect, the disruption was caused when I was asked to move for reasons unrelated to safety or schedule. It is a matter of principle. I will not compromise my rights as a paying passenger." Captain Stokes' expression hardened. He had spent his career ensuring smooth operations and clear chain of command. But today, the challenge before him was more complex than any mechanical malfunction or weather delay. "Mr. Rhoades, the choice is simple," the captain said, his voice steady but firm. "You may either move voluntarily to the alternate suite, 4B, or you will be removed from the aircraft. The decision is yours." The weight of those words fell like a stone through the cabin. Langston studied the captain for a long moment, feeling the invisible pressure tighten. To yield would be to accept the injustice. To refuse would be to risk humiliation. His mind raced back to moments when he had been forced to make impossible choices, when the only options offered were unequal. He thought of the boy he once was, the man he had become, and the legacy he wanted to leave. Finally, his voice emerged calm and clear. "Captain, I choose neither to move under duress nor to be forcibly removed. I will leave this flight on my own terms." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Around them, passengers whispered behind hands and brows furrowed. Bradford Elwood leaned back in his seat, an expression of disbelief flickering across his face. Carla Denning stepped forward, her professional mask slipping momentarily into something sharper. "Captain, we must act quickly. This is compromising the entire flight." Captain Stokes met her eyes and nodded. "Understood. I will inform ground security and proceed accordingly." Langston remained composed, gathering his briefcase and tablet slowly. He moved with deliberate grace, a man reclaiming his dignity one step at a time. As he passed Bradford, their eyes met for a fleeting second. Bradford's gaze was hard, a mixture of anger and disbelief. Langston offered no response, only the quiet confidence of a man who knew his worth. At the jet bridge, Langston took a moment to look back at the aircraft. The gleaming fuselage reflected the gray sky, a monument to luxury and, now, to conflict. His phone vibrated. The screen lit up with a message from Nadine Mercer, chairwoman of Alteris Aviation Group. "Status." He typed back, "Off plane, flight grounded." The reply was instant. "Good. Keep me updated." Langston folded the phone away, inhaled deeply, and stepped into the terminal. Back on the plane. The mood shifted quickly. Bradford glared at the empty seat 1A, frustration mounting. Passengers murmured their confusion and impatience. Flight attendants scrambled to maintain order, their smiles tight and strained. Carla's facade crumbled beneath the weight of the unfolding crisis. The confidence she wielded just minutes ago now felt fragile, exposed. Captain Stokes retreated to the cockpit, fingers trembling slightly as he picked up the sat phone. His voice was low as he reported the situation to operations. The words on the line carried the weight of consequences far beyond this flight. Somewhere in the corporate tower, Nadine Mercer listened intently. She knew what was at stake. This was not merely about a seat or a passenger. It was about the soul of a company. In the galley, Alyssa Tran watched the drama unfold with a knot in her stomach. She felt torn between loyalty to her employer and the undeniable truth of what had happened. She thought of Langston's quiet strength, his refusal to bow. For a moment, she dared to hope. The plane was grounded. The fight was far from over. Langston Rhoades stepped off the plane with a calm resolve that belied the storm swirling behind him. The jet bridge felt narrower somehow, like the space where dignity met disdain was confined and fragile. His polished leather shoes made soft echoes on the terminal floor, but inside, his mind was loud with clarity. He was not angry. He was not broken. He was steady, unmoved by the undercurrents of entitlement and prejudice that had sought to unseat him from a space he had rightfully earned. In the hours that followed, the airport became a battleground of whispers and rumors. Passengers shuffled off the grounded Aerolux Flight 217, some bewildered, others irritated by the delay. Crew members exchanged glances heavy with unspoken truths. Somewhere in the crowd, Bradford Elwood IV grumbled loudly, demanding compensation, a private jet, and personal apologies, his voice echoing the entitlement that had triggered this entire conflict. But Langston held no bitterness for Bradford. To him, the man was a symptom, not a cause. Langston's phone vibrated with another call. This time it was Nadine Mercer, the chairwoman of Altiris Aviation Group, the parent company of Aerolux Airlines. "Langston," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "The board is meeting as we speak. The incident has already hit social media. It's escalating fast." He nodded, though she could not see it. "I understand. This is bigger than a single flight or crew. It's about the culture we allow to thrive." Nadine sighed softly. "Agreed. I'm authorizing immediate grounding of the flight and the suspension of involved crew members pending investigation." "Good," Langston said. "We need to send a clear message that respect is not negotiable." The weight of the moment settled over him again, but this time it felt purposeful, charged with possibility. The very system that had sought to exclude him was about to be held accountable, back inside the aircraft. The atmosphere was tense. Carla Denning paced nervously, clutching her tablet like a shield. Flight attendants whispered behind closed doors, some defensive, others ashamed. Alyssa Tran sat quietly, her eyes distant but hopeful. The crew had been told that their credentials would be suspended. They were to prepare for immediate termination if the investigation confirmed breaches of conduct. Langston watched the unfolding chaos from the terminal cafe, sipping a black coffee. His mind replayed the moments on the plane, the subtle glances, the coded language, the insistence that he yield his rightful place. But his thoughts weren't consumed by anger or revenge. They were consumed by what needed to come next. Because this was not just a personal fight. It was a systemic failure, a broken culture that valued privilege over principle. He thought back to his own journey from a small apartment in Atlanta, where his mother taught him the value of standing tall, even when the world tried to make him small. From every closed door and whispered slight, he learned that dignity was not a gift given. It was a fortress built, brick by brick, in the face of adversity. And today, that fortress was being tested at 30,000 feet. His phone buzzed again, a message from Alyssa. "Thank you for trusting me. I want to help change this. Please let me." Langston smiled faintly. This was the beginning, not the end. Over the next several hours, he convened with Nadine and a small team of trusted advisors. Together, they drafted plans to dismantle the toxic systems that had allowed this incident to happen. They would eliminate the tiered loyalty program that gave some passengers unassailable privilege at the expense of others' dignity. They would create an independent office of inclusivity and customer excellence, led by someone with true moral courage. They would invest in training programs designed not to teach service, but to teach respect. And, most importantly, they would rebuild the airline's culture from the ground up. Later that evening, Langston sat alone in his hotel room overlooking the city skyline. The lights twinkled like distant stars, indifferent yet constant. He thought about the countless people who would never see themselves reflected in boardrooms or first-class cabins, the quiet ones who worked tirelessly, who waited patiently, who deserved better. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be backlash, denial, resistance, but he also knew this change was inevitable when fueled by integrity. He allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Then he picked up his phone and typed a message to Nadine. "Let's make history." Meanwhile, across the city, Bradford Elwood IV sat in his penthouse, staring at his phone with growing anxiety. The viral video of the confrontation had exploded across social media, sparking debates, hashtags, and condemnation. His law firm had already suspended him pending review. His personal reputation was crumbling. For all his money and connections, he had underestimated one thing: the power of truth and justice in the digital age. Back at JFK, Alyssa Tran stood by the gate, watching new passengers board a different flight. Her uniform now bore the insignia of the airline's newly formed Ethics and Inclusivity Task Force. She was no longer just a junior attendant. She was a symbol of hope. Langston's quiet stand had sparked a revolution. The seat he had refused to yield was more than leather and space. It was a statement, a declaration that dignity and respect were not privileges reserved for a few, but rights held by all. Captain Harvey Stokes sat in the cockpit, hands resting on the edge of the center console. The usual rhythm of pre-flight checks and intercom chatter had vanished. Instead, there was silence, a silence that buzzed with consequence. He had just ended the call. The voice on the other end had been calm, almost too calm. Nadine Mercer, chairwoman of the Alteris Aviation Group, spoke with precision and finality. The words she had said replayed in his mind like static beneath his skin. "Captain, confirm your flight number, Flight 217 JFK to Oslo." Stokes replied, unsure where the call was heading. "Confirm your name, Harvey Stokes." Then a pause, cold and clinical. "Now describe the man your crew just removed from Suite 1A." Stokes blinked, confused for a beat, then answered. Tall, mid-40s, black, well-dressed, calm, professional demeanor. He offered no resistance, voluntarily deplaned. Another pause. Then the blow landed. That man is Langston Rhoades, founder and CEO of Viavax Industries, and as of last quarter, controlling partner in Alteris Aviation Group. Harvey had felt something shift in that moment. His stomach hollowed. His breath shortened. The chair beneath him suddenly felt like it might collapse. You just removed the owner of the airline from his own plane. He remembered those words not as reprimand, but as sentence. A verdict passed from above. When Carla Denning entered the cockpit minutes later, her energy was frazzled. Her perfect composure had cracks now. She knew something had gone wrong, but not yet how deep the fault line ran. "What's happening? Harvey, we're still grounded. The gate agent said we're holding for clearance." Stokes didn't look up. He swallowed once, hands clasped. "We're not waiting for clearance. We're grounded indefinitely." Carla's brow furrowed. "That doesn't make sense. The manifest was processed, the flight plan filed." He turned toward her slowly, eyes heavy with the weight of a truth he had just absorbed. "Langston Rhoades owns a majority stake in this airline. That man was our employer, and we just forced him off his own aircraft." The words landed like bricks. Carla's mouth opened, then closed again. The color drained from her face. Her grip on the cockpit door tightened as her breath grew shallow. "That's not possible," she whispered. "He didn't say who he was. He didn't act. He didn't have to." Harvey cut in. "That's exactly the point." She backed into the cockpit wall, shoulders slumped. I thought he was just another difficult passenger." "He wasn't difficult," Stokes replied. "He was dignified, and we failed him." In the main cabin, the mood had turned from inconvenience to confusion. Passengers checked their watches, whispered to one another, speculated wildly. A man in 3C was filming with his phone. A woman near the front asked a crew member quietly if someone had been arrested. Bradford Elwood reclined with a champagne glass in hand, watching the tension unravel around him like an audience member enjoying a performance he didn't realize he was starring in. The final blow came over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Unfortunately, due to an unforeseen operational matter, Flight 217 has been canceled. We ask that you gather your belongings and prepare to deplane. We apologize for the inconvenience." The reaction was swift and disjointed. A chorus of groans, scattered curses, and rising tempers rippled through the cabin. Passengers were escorted back through the jet bridge where security officers were already waiting, not for the customers, but for the crew. Carla Denning was approached first. A senior manager in a gray suit and clipped tone handed her a sealed envelope. "You are hereby suspended pending investigation. Please surrender your credentials." Her hands trembled as she unclipped her badge and handed over her tablet. She looked toward Alyssa, who stood at the rear galley, silent and pale. The young attendant stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. "It wasn't right," she said. "What we did. He had his boarding pass. He was calm. We forced him to defend his presence in a seat he paid for." The manager nodded slowly. "Thank you for your statement. You'll be contacted by the Office of Ethics." Carla's jaw clenched. "You should be careful. Alyssa, picking sides can have consequences." Alyssa met her eyes, voice steady, Soda staying silent. Security escorted the remaining crew off the aircraft in single file, their uniforms now symbols of a failed system rather than prestige. Harvey Stokes walked last. He held his cap in his hand, head bowed slightly. Years of flying, thousands of flight hours, and it had ended like this. On the tarmac outside, the sun had begun to pierce the gray clouds, casting pale light on the parked aircraft, but inside the terminal, the darkness of the fallout had only begun to settle. News of the incident had broken in waves. A tech blogger on the flight had tweeted about it. Then an activist with 1 million followers retweeted with the caption, "Black CEO removed from his own first-class seat by airline that he owns." The hashtag took off. Seat 1A. By the time Langston returned to his hotel, the story was front-page news on every business media platform. But he didn't speak to journalists. He didn't post a thread. He made no viral video. Instead, he did what he always did. He went quiet and got to work. From his hotel suite, Langston joined an emergency video call with the Altaris board. They expected fury, demands, heads to roll. But what they got was different. He listened, then he spoke. What happened today is not just a customer service failure. It's not just a personnel failure. It's a cultural failure, and we must change it at the root. He laid out his demands. The loyalty hierarchy that turned customers into deities dismantled. The performance metrics that rewarded staff for appeasing privilege erased. In its place, a new department, the Office of Passenger Dignity and Inclusion. An independent body with direct authority over hiring, training, and crew accountability. And he had someone in mind to help lead it. Alyssa Tran. The board was stunned, but they nodded. Langston wasn't building a revenge campaign. He was rebuilding a system. This time, with a foundation worthy of flight. Langston Rhoades sat in a high-backed leather chair at the edge of the Altaris executive conference room. The skyline of Manhattan sprawled behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. But his eyes weren't on the view. They were on the future. The room was silent as he stood. No PowerPoint, no slides, no consultants, just one man in a tailored black suit, holding the attention of a dozen board members with nothing more than his presence. What happened on Flight 2117 is not isolated. It is not about one passenger, one crew, or one decision. It is about an invisible system, built over decades, that teaches people to look at someone like me and question whether I belong in the seat I paid for. He let the words sit across the table. Nadine Mercer gave a single nod, not as an executive but as a witness. Langston continued, "We are not here to punish individuals. We are here to dismantle a culture. If we fail to act now, we are co-signing every injustice that follows. The board, made up of men and women in expensive suits with world-class educations, looked shaken, not by aggression, not by blame, but by the quiet power of truth laid bare." Langston laid out his proposal, effective immediately. Aerolux Airlines would suspend its elite loyalty tier program. It would no longer allow status to dictate overrides in the seat assignments or onboard treatment. A new division would be formed, the Office of Passenger Dignity and Inclusion, reporting directly to the board, with oversight authority over every touch point of the customer journey. But he wasn't finished. We will also restructure cabin crew training from the ground up. No longer will performance be judged solely by customer satisfaction surveys or sales. It will be judged by adherence to dignity, fairness, and respect. Those who uphold it will rise. Those who don't will not fly for us. One board member, a senior director from Zurich, leaned forward. "That sounds noble, Mr. Rhoades, but it's going to cost us. There will be pushback from top-tier customers. Investors will question the ROI of such a moral recalibration." Langston turned to him calmly. "Respect always costs more than compliance, but the return on dignity is trust, and trust is the currency of the future." Silence followed. Then Nadine spoke. "Make the motion. Let's vote." It passed unanimously. Langston nodded once. Then he did something no one expected. He declined the corporate jet waiting outside. Instead, he booked a commercial flight, coach, from New York to Denver. Just a regular boarding pass, checked in on his phone, because he knew change had to be felt, not just issued. On the flight to Denver, he sat between two strangers, one a tired nurse on her way home from a night shift, the other a middle-aged man carrying a saxophone in a worn leather case. No one asked who he was. No one questioned his right to the seat. And that, he thought, was exactly the point. Back at Alteris headquarters, Nadine Mercer moved quickly to operationalize the changes. Carla Denning had submitted a formal apology but was removed from her role pending retraining. Captain Harvey Stokes accepted full responsibility and requested retirement, citing moral fatigue. Alyssa Tran, meanwhile, was flown out to the headquarters for an interview with the Ethics Review Council. When she entered the boardroom, she felt her palms sweat and heart race. But Langston was there, seated quietly in the corner. He gave her a nod of encouragement. She spoke clearly. "What I saw on that plane was more than a seating issue. It was the culmination of years of silent training to serve those who looked like they had power and overlook those who didn't. I don't want to be part of that anymore. I want to help build something better." They hired her on the spot. Her new role, Director of Passenger Dignity Education. Her first act, rewrite the training manual. From page 1, Langston returned to New York a week later. This time, when he boarded a flight, the gate agent looked at his name, paused, and smiled not out of recognition of his title, but out of respect for what he had done. Suite 1A was empty again. This time, it was waiting for him, but he didn't take it. He chose Suite 4B, the same seat they had once offered him as a consolation prize, and in that choice he sent a quiet message. Every seat, every person, deserves the same dignity. The media picked up the story and ran with it. The narrative had shifted. He wasn't just the man who had been wronged. He was the man who redefined the sky. Airlines around the country began reviewing their customer policies. Executives called for workshops. Travelers started sharing stories not just of mistreatment, but of hope. And at the center of it all was Langston Rhoades, not loud, not vengeful, just firm. He sat on panels, spoke at forums, but mostly he listened. He listened to flight attendants who had been silenced, to passengers who had been shamed, to quiet voices that had waited too long to be heard. Then, 3 months after the incident, he walked into the newly renovated headquarters of what was once Aerolux Airlines, now renamed Varelia Air. The logo was different, the culture was different, but the purpose was the same: to fly people with dignity, not just to get them where they were going, but to show them they mattered on the way there. Langston entered the lobby as workers placed the final plaque on the wall. It read, Seat 1A. This seat belongs to everyone, always has, always will. He stood for a moment, reading the words. Then he smiled and walked on. The first flight under the new Varelia Air banner was scheduled for the following Monday. The destination was symbolic Atlanta, a city stitched together by civil rights history and quiet revolutions. It was the place where Langston Rhoades first dreamed of building something greater than himself. The rebranded aircraft stood gleaming at Gate 14A, its new insignia catching sunlight in soft hues of gold and blue. Gone were the gaudy loyalty banners and tiered customer boarding lanes. In their place stood a single sign, simple and bold: all passengers. One line. Inside the terminal, the mood was different, softer, more curious than entitled. A few loyal flyers murmured about the new policies. Some grumbled at the removal of priority boarding, but most stood watching, reading the posters that lined the walls. Dignity is not a luxury. It is your right. Everyone matters at Varelia Air. No seat holds more value than the person sitting in it. Langston didn't fly on this inaugural trip. He chose to stay behind at headquarters, monitoring the response from the public and speaking with ground staff throughout the day. But the flight manifest included someone just as important. Alyssa Tran sat in the jump seat near the forward galley, her new badge pinned with quiet pride, Director of Passenger Dignity Education. This was her first flight back in uniform, but the title on her nameplate said everything. She wasn't there to serve champagne or refill napkins. She was there to listen, observe, and ensure that the principles Langston had fought for lived in every corner of the cabin. The crew on board that day had gone through the first iteration of the restructured training, a 40-hour intensive that emphasized empathy, historical context, bias awareness, and above all else, human connection. They were different now, not perfect, but aware, open. As passengers boarded, Alyssa greeted each one with warmth. There was an elderly man with a tattered blazer and a cane. In the past, he might have been overlooked. Today, a flight attendant helped him with his coat and offered him a bottle of water without hesitation. There was a young black woman with 2 children, one of them clinging to a stuffed giraffe. A crew member knelt to the child's level and showed him a small activity kit prepared especially for young travelers. No side glances, no impatience. There was a transgender teen with headphones and anxious eyes. Alyssa offered a nod, a smile, and a quiet welcome. Not forced, not performative, just human. In Suite 1A sat someone who had never flown first class before. Her name was Maribel Cortez, a public school teacher from Albuquerque who had written an essay about equity in transportation for her graduate degree. The airline had quietly upgraded her as part of their new Human Dignity Spotlight program. She didn't know she was being recognized. She just thought she'd been given a seat she could never afford. As she settled into the leather-lined suite, Alyssa approached with a soft voice. "Welcome aboard. Ms. Cortez, thank you for everything you do. Today, we hope to serve you as generously as you've served others." Maribel looked up, startled. "How did you?" Alyssa just smiled. "It's our turn now." As the flight took off, something changed in the air. Not just the altitude, but the atmosphere. There was no tension, no hierarchy, just people sharing a space among clouds, treated as equals. In the cockpit, Captain Lucia Bay adjusted the altitude dial and smiled to herself. It had been a long time since flying felt this light. Back in New York, Langston received updates in real time. His phone buzzed with messages from ground staff, gate agents, and even passengers who had heard whispers about the man behind the movement. But Langston kept to his quiet space. He was in a small room at Varelia's new headquarters. No windows, just one large wall, now covered with pinned notes and photos, stories, handwritten letters from passengers, emails from crew, photos of families reunited, of elderly travelers finally feeling seen, of moments that seemed small but meant everything. In the center of the wall was a printed screenshot of the viral video that had started it all. Langston standing in Suite 1A, calm and immovable, as the world tried to displace him. Next to it, someone had written in black ink from Seat 1A. He recharted the sky. Langston stood there, absorbing the moment. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just breathed. Outside the room, Nadine Mercer entered quietly. "They've asked if you'll attend the gala next month," she said. "The Civil Aviation Reform Foundation wants to honor you with a leadership award." Langston turned, eyes steady. Do they want me? Or do they want the symbol Nadine considered that? Both. Probably. He nodded, then glanced back at the wall. "Let's accept. But I want every crew member from Flight 217 invited, especially Alyssa." Nadine smiled. "Already done." Langston stepped out of the room, his mind shifting again toward the future. The rebrand was only the beginning. Varelia would be the first airline in the world to implement real-time ethics tracking, live customer feedback hubs, and rotating anonymous passenger audits. He didn't want applause. He wanted results, and they were already taking flight. In a small airport in North Carolina, a gate agent handed a boarding pass to a young black teenager traveling alone. The boy glanced down and blinked. Seat 1A. The agent smiled. "Yes, that's yours." The boy looked up, uncertain. "But isn't that, like, the seat?" "It's your seat," she said gently, "and you earned it. Enjoy the flight." The boy stepped onto the plane slowly, his world shifting one step at a time, from Atlanta to New York, from Denver to Detroit. The ripple was spreading. A new sky was unfolding, not made of clouds, but of choices, of new stories, and the ones yet to be written. 3 weeks after the inaugural Varelia Air flight, Langston Rhoades quietly booked a seat on a red-eye flight to Los Angeles. There was no media announcement, no team of handlers, no security escort. He traveled alone, wearing a simple charcoal gray sweater and dark jeans, No suit, no tie, just a man making his way west, blending into the quiet hum of a late-night terminal. The gate agent didn't recognize him, and that's exactly what he hoped for. His boarding pass read Suite 2C. He had specifically avoided Suite 1A. That seat had taken on a life of its own, almost too symbolic now. He wanted to see how the new Varelia system worked from a place still considered privileged, but not overtly visible. As he stepped onto the plane, he observed the crew with careful attention. There was a warmth in their eyes, a difference in the way they greeted passengers. Each welcome felt less rehearsed, more human. "Good evening, sir. Welcome aboard," said a young flight attendant named Malik, his tone genuine. Langston smiled and nodded. "Thank you." He moved down the aisle slowly, not to cause delay, but to observe. There was a mother nursing her baby near the back, being gently offered a privacy screen and extra water by a crew member. In the center rows, an elderly couple was being helped with their carry-ons without hesitation or attitude. He sat down in the Suite 2C and took a breath. For a moment, he closed his eyes. This wasn't just another flight. It was a measure of change. Midway through the flight, as cabin lights dimmed and passengers settled into silence, a voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. My name is Captain Julianne Holt, and I want to welcome you aboard Varelia Air Flight 122. This airline was built on a simple belief that respect is not a reward, but a right. On behalf of our entire crew, thank you for flying with us." Langston opened his eyes and looked out the window. The stars stretched out in infinite quiet. For a brief moment, he felt small in the best possible way, not diminished, just connected. A few minutes later, Malik returned with a bottle of sparkling water and a polite smile. "Mr. Rhoades, I hope you're comfortable. If there's anything we can do for you, just say the word." Langston raised an eyebrow. "So you do know who I am?" Malik chuckled softly. "We all do, sir, but you didn't board like someone who wanted to be noticed." Langston leaned forward slightly. "How long have you been with the airline? Almost 4 years. Before and after the transition, it's different now. You can feel it." Langston nodded, his voice quiet. "Tell me how." Malik hesitated for a moment, thoughtful. "It's not just the training, it's the permission to care. Before, we were judged by how quickly we could resolve issues, how well we could keep elite passengers happy. Now, we're judged by how well we see people, even when they don't demand to be seen." Langston smiled. "That's the goal." Malik straightened. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why didn't you tell them who you were that day on the plane?" Langston looked out at the dark horizon, then back at him. "Because it shouldn't take a title to earn a seat you paid for." Malik nodded slowly, as if that answer had stitched something together in his understanding. After he left, Langston opened his tablet and began reading reports from the Office of Passenger Dignity. Stories poured in daily now. Some were glowing, others offered constructive criticism. But the trend was clear. Passengers were noticing the difference. A 78-year-old man in Minneapolis had written a letter describing how, for the first time in years, a crew member had spoken to him like he wasn't a burden. A teenager in Boston, traveling alone after being kicked out of his home for coming out as gay, shared that a flight attendant had quietly offered him a warm meal and a blanket without questions. Just kindness. A young woman in Dallas who had experienced panic attacks on planes before wrote that someone simply sat with her, breathing alongside her until she felt safe again. None of these acts had made headlines, but they were changing lives. Langston closed the reports and leaned back. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing a culture, a different kind of altitude. As the flight descended into Los Angeles, the lights of the city stretched wide and endless beneath them. When the wheels touched down, the cabin stirred, seat belts clicked, bags shifted. Langston waited, not because of status, but because he preferred to let others go first. As he exited the plane, Malik stood by the door, offering a final smile. "Thank you again, Mr. Rhoades." Langston paused. "Thank you. You made this flight feel like a human place." Outside the terminal, a cool breeze greeted him. He stood for a moment on the curb, watching the hum of airport life around him, taxis pulling up, families reuniting, strangers sharing rides. He wasn't being recognized. No one snapped a photo. No one asked for a quote. And yet he felt more seen than ever. Because the real victory wasn't being known. It was making sure others were never overlooked again. The ballroom of the Crestmore Hotel in Washington, D.C. shimmered in warm light and polished silver. Crystal glasses lined linen-covered tables. A string quartet played near the stage where a tall banner fluttered with grace. The 27th Annual Civil Aviation Reform Foundation Awards, honoring leaders who elevate humanity through flight. Langston Rhoades stood near the back of the room, his hands in his pockets, watching the space fill with people in suits and gowns. He had been to enough galas to know how these nights often went applause scripted, speeches rehearsed, faces masked in professionalism. But tonight felt different, because tonight they weren't just honoring profit or expansion, they were honoring change. He had hesitated before accepting the invitation, not because he didn't believe in the cause, but because he didn't want to become the story. He wanted the movement to speak for itself. Still, Nadine had convinced him. Let them see that dignity doesn't just sit quietly. Sometimes it stands on a stage and redefines what leadership looks like. So he had come. Alyssa Tran arrived just before the program began, her dress simple but elegant, a gold pin on her lapel with the Varelia wings. She looked nervous as she approached Langston, her hands clasped in front of her. "I've never been to anything like this," she admitted. "You belong here," Langston said, offering a smile, "every bit as much as anyone else in this room." She exhaled slowly. "When they called me to present the award, I thought they had the wrong person." "They didn't," he replied, "and you'll do great." The lights dimmed and the host took the stage. Speeches followed, some inspiring, others predictable. There were awards given for innovation, for safety excellence, for carbon neutrality. Then came the moment that shifted the tone of the night. "And now," said the host, "we come to the final and most anticipated award of the evening, the Dignity in Flight Award, presented to an individual or organization that has redefined what it means to fly with humanity." The room quieted. This year, for the first time, this award is not being given to a policy or a product or a marketing campaign. It is being given to a person who did not fight with words or threats or lawsuits, but with presence. The room turned to the screen behind the stage. A still image appeared, Langston Rhoades standing quietly in Suite 1A, his hands folded in his lap, eyes calm. The story was told briefly, but truthfully, no embellishment, just the facts. A black man wrongly asked to leave his seat, a crew that failed to recognize dignity, a quiet decision to leave on his own terms, and the next decision to change an entire airline from the inside out. Then, the host smiled, and tonight, that airline is known around the world as Varelia Air. The room erupted in applause, but Langston did not move. Instead, he looked to Alyssa. "It's your story, too," he said. She shook her head. "I was just a witness." "Exactly," he said, "and you chose to see." They walked to the stage together. Langston spoke first, brief and firm. "I'm honored to accept this award, but I'd be lying if I said I enjoy standing here. I would have preferred to sit peacefully on a plane, in the seat I paid for, like anyone else. But sometimes the seat you're denied becomes the reason you rise." He paused. People listened. What happened that day was not new. It was not shocking to many people who look like me, but it was visible, and sometimes visibility changes everything. He looked around the room, not just at executives, but at crew members, union leaders, maintenance workers in pressed shirts and polished shoes. This change was not about me. It was about all of us, because what we tolerate becomes our legacy, and I refuse to leave behind a sky that punishes people for their presence. The applause was thunderous, but not rushed. It rose slowly, like a tide coming in. Then Alyssa stepped forward. "I was there," she began, and at first I was silent. I was afraid to say something wrong. I didn't want to lose my job, but I realized silence was already costing me more than my paycheck. She paused. "We are taught how to pour wine and smile on cue, but we are not taught how to stand up for someone quietly being erased in front of us. That's what Varelia is changing." She looked at Langston, then back at the crowd. Dignity is not complicated. It is noticing and choosing not to look away. The standing ovation that followed was different from the others that night. It wasn't just politeness, it was gratitude. When they left the stage, Langston did not linger in the spotlight. He returned to the quiet corners of the ballroom where conversations hummed again. People approached him, some apologized for past complicity, others thanked him. A few just stood quietly nearby, unsure how to put their respect into words. But one person found her way through the crowd with quiet determination. An older woman, maybe in her 70s, with kind eyes and silver braids. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but I flew with your airline last week. I've been flying for decades, and it was the first time I wasn't asked if I belonged in first class." Langston felt something catch in his chest. He nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me that." "No," she replied. "Thank you for making room for me, for people like me." And then she was gone. Later that night, Langston stood outside the hotel beneath the quiet glow of the city. He looked up. Planes crisscrossed the sky above, their lights blinking in rhythm. Not all of them were Varelia planes. Not all of them carried new culture. But some did, and that was enough. For now, because revolutions don't always roar. Sometimes they begin in silence, with a man in a seat who chooses not to be moved. 2 days after the gala, Langston Rhoades returned home to a quiet apartment overlooking the East River. The glass walls framed the slow-moving water like a still photograph. Outside, the world was already moving on, as it always did. Stories faded, hashtags disappeared. But real change, lived in slower currents. He poured a cup of coffee and opened his laptop to review the latest internal reports from Varelia Air. The new onboarding program had completed its 3rd week. Passenger complaints had dropped by nearly 40%. The Office of Passenger Dignity had processed over 1,000 messages, most of them positive, some constructive, all of them human. Langston smiled at a note from a junior flight attendant in San Diego. "Thank you. For the first time, I feel like I work for an airline, not a machine." He leaned back, stretching his arms above his head. The fatigue had settled into his body, but it was the kind that came after meaning, not after struggle. He welcomed it. As he turned to grab his phone, he noticed something different on the small side table near the entrance. A thick envelope, hand-addressed, with no return label. He hadn't seen it the night before. Likely slid under the door during the early morning. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, a single sheet, cream-colored, folded once. "Dear Mr. Rhoades, you don't know me. We've never met, but I owe you an apology, and you deserve to hear it directly. My name is Bradford Elwood IV. I was a passenger on Flight 217 who asked the crew to relocate you. I told them it was urgent, that I had medical needs, that I was a long-time elite flyer. The truth is, I lied. I had no condition, no emergency. I simply wanted the seat. And when I saw you sitting in it, I felt entitled to it in a way I can't fully explain. I didn't realize who you were. But that's not the point. I should not have needed your title to question my actions. I watched the footage later. I saw how you never raised your voice, how you chose to leave instead of escalate, and how you didn't retaliate when you could have. I've been suspended by my firm. I lost several clients. Friends distanced themselves. But what I lost most was the illusion I'd built around myself. I'm in therapy now, for the first time in my life, not to win back approval, but to understand why I acted the way I did. You owe me nothing, but I needed to say it. I'm sorry. I see it now. I see you." Bradford Langston sat still for a long time. The letter in his hands felt both heavy and hollow. He read it again, slower this time, letting each word settle. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt something else. Recognition, not of himself, but of how deep this wound had always run, not just in others' behavior, but in the structures that had taught it, maintained it, defended it. He folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of his desk. Not to hide it, but to remind himself, even those who fall short can still find their way forward. Later that day, Langston boarded another Varelia flight, this time to Detroit, where a new training center was opening. He sat again in a mid-cabin seat, quiet, anonymous. A young man in the row ahead of him looked back once, then twice, before finally turning around. "Excuse me, are you?" Langston gave a faint smile. "Probably." The man chuckled, nervous. "I just wanted to say thank you. I was on a flight last month. My mother has dementia. We'd had a rough morning. I was sure we'd be treated like a problem, but your crew, they helped her laugh. One of them even sang to her." Langston's eyes softened. "She felt like a person again," the man said. "Just for a few hours. That was everything." Langston nodded. "Thank you for sharing that with me." As the flight took off, he closed his eyes and remembered something from long ago, a bus ride through Georgia. He had been 10 years old. His mother, strong and proud, had refused to give up her seat when asked to move for a white passenger. The driver had yelled, passengers had stared, but she had not moved. When they got off, she turned to him and said something he never forgot. "You don't always get justice, baby, but you can always carry your dignity. That memory returned now, not as a shadow, but as a light. When the plane landed in Detroit, Langston visited the new Varelia Center for Passenger Equity. The building was modest, with clean lines and wide glass doors. Inside were classrooms, flight simulators, empathy labs, and reflection rooms. Alyssa Tran met him at the front, holding a clipboard and wearing a calm expression. We just finished orientation with our second cohort. Some of the new hires came from competitors. Said they applied after hearing what we're doing here. Langston nodded. How are they responding? Surprisingly open, Alyssa said. The ones who've been in the industry the longest are often the ones most eager to unlearn. It's humbling. He walked with her through the halls, past groups of crew members sitting in circles, talking, laughing, listening. One room was covered in sticky notes, each one bearing a story from a passenger or crew member about a time they felt invisible. Above the notes was a sign. You cannot fix what you refuse to see. Langston paused there. Alyssa watched him. We don't talk about heroism here, she said softly. We talk about noticing, about deciding again and again to see. Langston looked around. And are they seeing now? Alyssa smiled. More and more every day, that night, back in his hotel. Langston looked out over the lights of Detroit. He thought of the letter in his drawer, the mother with dementia, the sticky notes on the wall, the songs sung mid-flight, the apologies, the small revolutions, and he whispered something into the stillness. Let it stay. Let it grow. He knew the work wasn't done. It never would be. But he also knew something had shifted not just in the airline industry, but in the very air people breathed when they stepped onto a plane. The altitude had changed, and it wasn't just about feet above ground. It was about how high we lift each other when we decide to see. It was spring in New York when Langston Rhoades returned to the airport where everything had begun. Terminal B looked the same on the outside, bustling with travelers, carts rattling across the tiles, announcements echoing from unseen speakers. But inside, something had shifted. It wasn't visible to everyone, but to Langston, the change was tangible. The signs were different. One said, "Every seat is earned, every person is honored." Another read, "Seat 1A is not about privilege, it's about presence." A third, tucked into the corner near Gate 21, read, "Only. Welcome home." Langston walked slowly through the terminal. No security detail, no crowd, just him. He passed a kiosk with a smiling agent who offered help. He nodded and continued. At the gate, a boarding agent called over the intercom. Pre-boarding is now open. Families with young children, elderly travelers, and those needing extra time may now board. Group 1 and Group 2 will follow. No status, no tears, just order, just care. Langston waited, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see the flow. He watched a young couple hold hands as they approached the jet bridge. An older woman with a cane smiled at a crew member who offered to carry her bag. A teen, traveling alone, looked around nervously and was gently reassured by a flight attendant with kind eyes. Finally, his turn. Boarding pass scanned, Suite 1A. He had not requested it, it had been offered, chosen for him. A symbol, perhaps, but also a circle. He stepped onto the aircraft slowly. The crew greeted him, not with fanfare, not with hushed recognition, but with sincerity. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Rhoades. We're honored to have you." Langston nodded. "Thank you. It's good to be here." Suite 1A was the same. Leather seat, Adjustable lamp, fold-out table, glass of water waiting, but it didn't feel the same. It didn't feel like a throne. It felt like a seat, a good one, earned not through status, but through story. He sat and looked out the window. Alyssa Tran entered the cabin moments later. Though she no longer flew regularly, she had joined this flight as part of an onboard review, dressed simply, clipboard in hand. She smiled when she saw him. "Mind if I join you?" Langston smiled. Not at all. She sat across from him, folding her clipboard. "It's strange," she said. "All this time, I thought change would feel louder." Langston nodded. "Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just a deeper quiet." The flight took off smoothly, wheels lifting into a sky painted soft with clouds. As they climbed, Langston looked at the seat across the aisle, Suite 1B empty today. He remembered Bradford. He hadn't responded to the letter. Not yet. He didn't know if he would. Some wounds took longer to scar over than others, but he had made peace with that. During the flight, a young boy passed through first class on his way to the restroom. He paused when he saw Langston. "Are you the man from the story?" Langston blinked. "What story?" The boy's eyes lit up. "My teacher told us about you. The man who made the airplane better. The one who didn't yell, even when they were mean to him." Langston gave a soft smile. "Yes, I guess that was me." The boy thought for a second, then asked. "Were you scared?" Langston paused, then answered truthfully. "Yes, a little. But sometimes courage is being scared and still deciding not to shrink." The boy nodded seriously. "Okay, I think I want to be like that." Langston smiled. "Then you already are." The boy's mother called him back, apologizing for the interruption, but Langston waved it off. After the boy left, Alyssa looked at him. "That's why we did all this, isn't it?" Langston nodded. "Not for headlines, not for awards. For that." The flight landed in Chicago just before sunset. As passengers disembarked, the pilot, a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her hair, stood at the cockpit door and shook Langston's hand. "You didn't just give us new wings," she said. "You gave us a new reason to fly." "Thank you." Langston stepped off the plane and into the golden wash of the terminal lights. At the gate, a plaque had been installed, small, simple, etched in brushed steel. Seat 1A. This seat once asked a question: who belongs here? A man answered with silence, and the world listened. Now it belongs to everyone, always. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away, not toward the exit, but toward the future. Final character notes, entire story. Recap: Langston Rhoades. Calm. Brilliant black CEO of Viavax Industries. Denied Suite 1A on Flight 217, later revealed as airline stakeholder. Quietly led systemic change through dignity and vision. Alyssa Tran. Former junior flight attendant who stood for truth. Became director of passenger dignity education. Embodied ethical leadership and practical compassion. Bradford Elwood IV. Entitled White Passenger Who Lied to Claim Langston's Seat. Later wrote an apology letter, symbol of reflection and transformation. Carla Denning and Harvey Stokes. Former crew of Flight 217. Represented outdated systems and silent biases. Nadine Mercer, chairwoman of Alteris Aviation. Backed Langston's reform from the inside. Malik, Lucia Bay, Maribel Cortez, Boy on Plane. Everyday passengers and staff who shaped the emotional resonance of change. Langston's mother, a memory and early source of quiet strength. Airline Aerolux Airlines. rebranded as Varelia Air, theme respect, equity, human dignity in every seat. A man lost a seat, but gained a mission. A system failed, but dignity rose. Langston Rhoades didn't fight back with anger. He fought back with vision, compassion, and an unshakable belief that every human being deserves to be seen. From that single flight, a new airline was born, a broken industry was challenged, and thousands of quiet voices finally had space to speak. But let's not forget, Langston should never have had to prove his worth to sit in the seat he paid for. He wasn't the first, and if we remain silent, he won't be the last. So ask yourself, how many times have we watched injustice and looked away? How many moments did we let slide because it was easier than speaking up? This is more than a story. It's a call to see, to act, to make sure no one ever gets asked to prove they belong again. If this story stirred something in you, show your support. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, and more lives waiting to be seen. Until next time, fly with dignity and keep your seat.